second and show some of you guys out there an amplifier I happen to be working on today. It's a personal amplifier. It's a Crossfire VR-804. Early 2000s, I think 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. I was a Crossfire dealer, and I also ran their amplifiers, the BMF 1000Ds. Were very good Korean Class Ds. Some of the first really small Class Ds that would stand up to abuse. So I used them for a while there, and I've had this amp obviously since I bought it new as a dealer back then. And I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I noticed that one channel was going out. It's a 4-channel amp. One weird thing about it, so it actually has a switch on the bottom that you switch. That would be right there. To take it from 2-channel to 4-channel input. Well, I noticed that had no effect on why the channel that went in and out on it would make a difference. So I did notice that the crossover for the rear channels, if I wiggled this, sometimes the channel would work. And so that's the problem with it. And it's just kind of been sitting on the shelf, and I had a chance to spend a couple minutes to fix it today. So I just wanted to point a couple things out to this amp if you happen to have one, or similar amps. This thing has a symmetrical power supply. It's got 4 RFC 3205s on each side, rectified, plus or minus 42 volts, so 82 volt swing on the rail voltage. Then it's got D718s and B688s as the outputs. You got 2 pairs for each channel. And obviously you can bridge it to where, you got one side here and one side there. 2 ohm stable, 4 ohm stable bridged. It is a Class AB, so, no 1 ohm stuff on it. It doesn't like that. The Class D amps made by Crossfire, to me they're built a little better, the standard. But I wanted to have matching gear, and this was the biggest 4-channel they made, so I used it. And it worked great. I mean, back then, this was a high-quality amp. Today, there's better stuff out there, but Korean amps, and Crossfire in Memphis, the other guy in town that had a different shop, he was a big Memphis guy, and I jumped on the Crossfire bandwagon, and I was very happy with them. I fix amps, obviously, so I fixed a lot of the Memphis. I think it was the ST1000s, ST500s, the little 1100 watt amplifiers that they had that were similarly designed. They were both Korean amps, both packed in a very small chassis. If they weren't handled correctly, you could have some heat issues with them because they were small. The Memphis amps were technically a little smaller. They were a little taller, but they were also very skinny. They had a bunch of subboards on them. As did the Crossfire, but they were laid out differently. So there were some things I like about each amp, obviously. If you had enough power to support it, and obviously I did. I had a 320 amp alternator and multiple batteries. But I ran these. I modded the BMF, the Class Ds that I had, and they were running 16 volts, and I read them at 0.66. And with box rise, never had any issues. I did run one at a half ohm, and it ran fine for small periods of time in a demo vehicle. We had it on 4 BMF 12s. But it did end up literally catching on fire at a half ohm, running it a little bit too hard one day. So, but anyway, back to this amp. Just to point out a couple things that are good and bad. We've come a long way on the pots they use today. I wasn't particularly fond of these open style pots. So basically, as you can see, I don't know if you can see in there when I'm turning, you can actually see the little fingers in there turning around on the pots. And I guess the good part is you could spray it out and clean it with electro-clean if you needed to. The bad part is stuff gets in there. Similarly to these switches, I did notice that the switch that I'm having problems with, it was actually missing this little foam protector that goes on there, and I can't imagine that does a lot, but it is a coincidence, that the one that's bad was missing that piece. I guess it blew out or rattled out at some point. But generally, I don't like these switches. These switches are cheap. they're going to be a point of failure. So I wish they had put a little better switches in there. Um, you know, everything else on the amp, it's got a nice thick circuit board. The layout's pretty clean. You know, for the size that it is. There's no wasted space, obviously. You know, looking at the bottom of the board, I do like the style connectors they used compared to what a lot of people did. 4 gauge inputs, 8 gauge on the speakers. But if you'll notice on the bottom of the amp, you're always going to have, you know, hot spots on the board, and that's always somewhere you should look if you're having problems when you're fixing an amp. If you see a spot on the board that looks like it's burnt, I mean, you know you have a problem. But even if just a spot's been hot, and I know the lighting here probably isn't the best, and I'm doing this on a cell phone camera, but can you kind of see hot, 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 hot? And right here it's been a little hot. Those are some larger resistors right here. But these right here are what I'm focusing on with you. These are the drive transistors that actually drive the outputs on here. And I'm going to be honest with you, this amp was run hard. It was run at 16 volts, or close to 16 volts. You know, it was not run below what it should be. I mean, it was, I think with the particular crossover networks I had on there, the active crossovers, it saw about 2 ohms per channel most of the time. So, I mean, that wasn't an issue. It wasn't, you know, but it did run a lot. It did run a lot wide open doing demos in the vehicle that it was in, or in multiple vehicles that it was actually in. So, I mean, this amp was in no means babied. However, it did have proper power, so it was never starved for voltage or amperage, you know, like some amps that you see that are damaged are. And this amp still works today. The only thing that's wrong is this switch. I mean, you can wiggle it and it sounds perfect, but I don't like that, and it's just, I had some free time, so I thought I'd fix it today. But I just wanted to make that note to some of you guys that don't do this all the time, and you've got an amp and maybe one channel on it works and one doesn't, or it's a, you know, one channel's crackly. A lot of times that's a potentiometer. Like, go look at where, if you have a gain or a crossover adjustment on that side and you move it and it crackles, well, you've got kind of 2 choices there. You can clean it or you can replace it. I replace a lot for people, but sometimes I'm able to clean one, and you know, if it's something I don't happen to have on hand and they want the amp back fast and I don't have that part, then, you know, we can clean it. You can actually take these apart by bending these little tabs out and pulling this apart and clean the wipers on it. I'm not suggesting you do that. If you can find a replacement, replace it. But sometimes the length of the shaft, it's hard to find one that, you know, in a particular amplifier, that the shaft you buy isn't too long on it. Of course, you can saw it off. I've done that plenty of times, and then, you know, taken an air tool or Dremel and smooth the end off where it looks as close as we can get it to what came there. You know, and I've even had a couple guys that literally requested for me to change a gain to where it stuck out of the hole, to where it was easy for them to put a knob on and adjust. Not your everyday guy on the street, but, you know, more somebody that's, you know, knows what they're doing and they play with their system a lot, and they want to be able to make quick adjustments or whatever. Honestly, once your gain's set, you shouldn't need to mess with it. But, you know, if you're paying me to do it, I'm going to tell you the ill-advised reasons why you shouldn't. But if you want a, you know, a volume dial, which it's not, but they're using it as that. You know, I had a guy that, back before we had MP3 player, you know, radios and head units that were common, you know, the guy was literally using his amp as a volume. He was just feeding it straight in, you know, through an adapter from his phone, basically. And it worked for him. I'm not suggesting you do it. I'm just saying I've done it for people. So, you know, that's some common stuff you'll see when you're looking at an amp. Always look for things like that make the most sense that's wrong. If you have an oscilloscope and you have a hot air station and I even have a component tester where I can match outputs and MOSFETs when I'm putting them in, because you never match batches. And I have so many used parts, you know, I can check them, and it actually lets you see the digital fingerprint of anything that you check with it, in circuit or out of circuit, which is what's nice about this. You can actually check everything in circuit, and maybe I'll make a video of that for you, why that's such a great piece of gear. I've had it for probably 10 years. And they don't make them anymore like that. The ones today cost a lot more money. I've had a few different brands. As a matter of fact, I've got a View Data also. But it's nice. And so, if you've got the right stuff to test this with, and even if you don't, and you're makeshift checking it, then a lot of times the first thing to go do is, literally wiggle knobs, check switches. Like this one, you actually have to put pressure on it at a certain way, and then it works. And so, sometimes it's a very simple fix. It doesn't have blown outputs. Most amps that I see, if you've got, a set of outputs that are shorted, it's going to trigger protection mode in the amp anyway. There are a few exceptions to that. But, say these went open or whatever, they may still function and you just lost a channel. But usually if you've got an amp and it's multi-channel amp and you lost one channel in it and it's still working, usually look to the input section of the amp. And if you were to divide this amp up, basically from these screws here, this is the input section where the RCAs come in, all these switches are, adjustments are crossover, so forth. And then this section here is the output section. That's where you see all the outputs at for each channel. Some are 2-channel, some are monoblock. This one's a 4-channel. It can be combined to a 2-channel. And then of course, you have your rail caps here, and then you have your toroidal transformers, and then you have a power supply. And you may have one where it's just the MOSFETs on one side and the rectifiers are on the other side, and you got one big toroidal transformer. And if it's a Class D, you're going to have some output chokes on there too. But it depends on the topology of the particular amp. This uses a TL494, I believe, for switching. Yeah, TL494CN. Older amp, obviously, but it still works. And I'm gonna say it was a quality built amplifier for the day. I know we've come a long way, but some of these amps are worth fixing. If you've got one and you want to fix it, I say give it a shot. What's the worst that can happen? A lot of times you can pick these things up really cheap from people who don't have the time. They got a new amp, they want a smaller amp. I mean, this thing's pretty big, but it's over a foot long. And now I've got an ARC audio amp that takes up, maybe this much space, and it does the same amount of power in literally like less than a quarter of the space this amp took. And so, but like, if you've got, say, a Hyphonics amp, this is a Brutus, I think it's a BR1600. But see, they've come a long way. See how they have closed pots on here now? Nothing's going to get in there. And this was not near as good of an amp as a Crossfire amp would have been. I mean, we sold these too as one of our cheaper lines. But when Zed Audio stopped building Hyphonics, and Maxonics took over all their lines, Crunch, Hyphonics, Autotech even. We were an Autotech dealer back when they were real. Today, everything that's built by Maxonics is kind of the same. I guess this is a BR1700D, but about the same board anyway. But yeah, I mean, every amp manufacturer has come a long way. They don't want comebacks. They don't want problems. They don't want you sending it back to them for something. So most of the time, unless your amp literally has went up in flames, there's a good chance you can fix it if you just sit down and you spend a little time. Electronics is a great industry. You don't have to do this as a full-time profession. You can literally just experiment. What's the worst? If you've got an amp that's already messed up and you have another replacement amp, learn how stuff works. Maybe you can fix that amp. Maybe you can fix your friend's amp. Maybe you can make a few dollars in the process. A lot of times it's a broken solder joint, or maybe where somebody let these RCAs get hit up against something and it comes out of the board right here, and when you wiggle this, the amp works or it doesn't. You don't have to have soldering stations like I have to do that. You can just get a Radio Shack soldering iron. I don't recommend it. I recommend at least get something with controllable temperature and a base station. But you can do it. Hacko makes great stuff. Zytronic makes pretty good stuff. Just pick something out there and take something apart and fix it. Use your hands. It will make you feel good to use your hands and your head to fix something. And you'll be proud. And instead of watching YouTube videos or whatever else that you might have wasted time. Now if you're learning watching videos, great, but what I'm saying is a lot of people just sit there and play video games and and that's all they do. It's great to get away for a few minutes, but pick up some tools. Grab you a fluke meter. I've got several of them. I've got a drawer full here of other meters. This is a B&K Precision, another fluke, a Mac Snap-on meter. I bought all this stuff over time. But pick up a cheap meter, even if it's one from, Harbor Freight for the free deal or the $2, whatever they charge you. No, it's not going to be precise, but it will give you an idea of what you're doing. And you will find out that it's fun to work on stuff and it's fun to solve problems. you will probably end up with a bunch of junk in your house that you're working on and parts containers everywhere, but in your little workroom. But, you know, it's worth it. So grab something and fix it, guys, and have a good day.